you so much, Anthony. It is really an honor to be here with this August group and to share with my friends at Ruby, as well as to share stage with Skip and Sam. All right, if I can get my screen share going. There we go. So thank you again. Once again, I'm Cynthia Wallace, one half of the co-founding team of the New Rural Project. I started this organization a little less than 2 years ago with my dear friend Helen, who is on that top picture there. Helen, unfortunately, is in recovery or in active COVID-19 mode. So definitely she would be here, would love to highlight her as well. But our organization, as I mentioned, we started about a little over a year and a half ago, focused on highlighting and engaging rural North Carolina. And so with that, I know I've got 8 minutes, so I know Anthony's always timing us, so I'm going to keep it moving. So I want to talk a little bit about who New Rural Project is and how we believe that we can impact change, and also one of our initial programs that we are already seeing some great success in. So I'll tell you about the program and then highlight a couple of our success stories. And if I run out of time, I'll get back to one of the success stories later. So New Rural Project, Helen and I both ran for office in 2020 together. I was the 9th Congressional District nominee here in North Carolina, and Helen was on her second run for North Carolina Senate 25. And while we weren't successful in that endeavor, we both were clear that there was still a lot of work to do in rural areas and that there wasn't a lot of folks out there doing it, particularly folks with a progressive mindset. And so as we looked at the numbers and saw what the opportunities might be, we saw that we had an opportunity to engage more young people, and young for us is under 40, and then marginalized folks. So folks who have traditionally been overlooked in their communities by political parties. And we wanted to be a part of helping identify and understand their essential needs, and then amplifying those voices, and then working with them to identify what the barriers are to their civic and electoral engagement, and then working to reduce them. And how we do that is we've got a 3-pronged strategy, which begins and ends with listening. So a lot less talking than what I'm doing right now, but listening to folks. Also, then based on that listening, increasing that civic and electoral engagement alongside them and other, very trusted community partners. And we think the results of this engagement could have impacted a 2020 election. In 2020 in North Carolina, the Supreme Court judge race was decided by 401 votes out of 5 million. Any of those 7 counties you saw on that front page could have made that difference if more young and marginalized folks had turned out to vote. So what we're doing, we're looking at the numbers. We've identified a population, in particular those under 40, that are African American, where there is substantial opportunity. This chart that has like 4 different groups of graphs there looks at elections, not only 2020, but the last 4 presidential cycles. And just directionally, what you will see is while white voters in these rural counties has increased from 2008, the high water mark in particular for our under 40 folks was 2008 and 2012. And that cliff, that red bar, arrow you can see was the sharpest in Black voters. What's even more substantial, that 48% there is Black men and women. If you tease out just Black men under 40 in 2020, that turnout rate was 35 to 40%. 60 to 65% of those who were already registered to vote just didn't show up. So how do we do it? We've done some listening. We've had focus groups. We've done polling. We've knocked on doors. And what we've identified is that when Black men talk to each other, things happen. And so we have launched our Barbershop Conversation series, and it's titled FADE, Fruitful African American Discussions on Empowerment. That name was developed by a 20-something-year-old Black man. And we are very clear that we don't have the answers and that we've got to have folks involved and engaged that represent the population that we're trying to reach. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what that program looks like. Our goal is, once again, that under 40 population. So we target in our barbershop conversation series 18 to 40-year-old, but 40-ish, because we definitely have the gamut in those rooms. We try to keep the sessions small so that there's a lot of good dialogue. We also try to partner within the community. So we have 7 counties, and we're trying to do at least 1, if not 2 of these programs in every county. And so we work to get a co-chair from the local barber. And we've done it with 1, we've done it with multiple. We find a lot more success when it's a collective group of people coming together to lead and support this effort. We have a full-time program director, but we also, within those communities, hire a part-time program assistant, someone from that community to help us build out the program. Where do we meet? We meet right in a barbershop. And what we found, barbers typically work Tuesday to Saturday. And so Sunday afternoons, almost none of them are working. And it's a good kind of quiet time for us to be able to get a really good engagement of folks, though we're open to moving that around. And what do we offer? They're giving us their time. We want to make sure that we're making it something that could be helpful. And so we do offer a $25 gift card for every session someone attends. It is a series of 4 sessions. I'll talk to you a little bit about what happens in each of those weekly sessions. And we also provide dinner. You can see on their right, we're in the South, so we've been providing a nice Southern meal from a local caterer. We also have always supported caterers of color in those communities. Folks that those participants are familiar with, and when they hear where the food's coming from, they're always excited. And then what happens in those 4 sessions? We start talking about civics 101 and civics at the local level. We bring in elected officials, county commissioners, town councilmen, town commissioners, but we bring them in not for them to do a lot of talking, but for them to actually do a lot of listening and to hear what those folks care about, what those gentlemen want in their community. And our program director does a lot of great research along with our part-time program assistant to bring in valuable resources as well. We talk about what the boards and commissions are that are available and open in their community, because we think that this engagement doesn't begin or doesn't end at voting. We want everyone in that room to become voters if they aren't, but we also want them to become engaged in their community and be a part of the true decision makers in other ways in addition to being a voter. And then we have some other topics, as you see there, about entrepreneurship, the justice system. A lot of these topics have come from our focus groups as well as the men and the folks in our community. And so that's kind of what happens. I'm kind of trying to, I know I only have 1 or 2 more minutes, so I'm going to move forward. And I can definitely answer more questions as we go through. I'd like to end with a couple of quick success stories. We launched this program in March in Anson County with our first 4-week series. And at the end of that series, these 3 30-ish-year-old men started their own grassroots civic organization after their barbershop participation. There they are, where they were basically just about 2 weeks ago, hosting their very first event, which was an alumni basketball tournament. It was standing room only. It was an alumni basketball tournament along with civic engagement. And so they had folks like us. You can vote. We all had tables in the lobby where we were registering folks to vote, receiving pledges to vote, as well as just giving out general information about what was happening electorally. So as you can see, one success out of an immediate program. Lastly, Scotland County, that's where we had our second one. That one started in June. We talked about those local boards and commissions. After that first session, about half dozen of our participants went to their county board of commissioners meetings. Many of them had never been to such a meeting, didn't even know they could be in the audience at that meeting. This was in June. By July, the 2 men on the right column had actually been appointed to boards and commissions in their town. Didn't know that was something they could do. They went from one session in the barbershop in June. A month later, 2 of them were sitting on the Planning and Zoning Board and the Tourism Development Authority Board in their rural county. And then that bottom is our graduating class of over 20 men in the community. So just a couple quick success stories. I probably went a couple minutes over. Sorry about that, Anthony. But look forward to hearing from Skip and Sam and taking your questions.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. If you would stop sharing your screen, and then I'll bring Skip's screen up. That was outstanding, and definitely I'm sure you'll be getting some questions there. So that's fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then Skip is going to tell me when to move along on his presentation. So Skip, go ahead and get started.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Cynthia. That was terrific. Very, very interesting. My name is Skip Halpern. I'm chair of the Page County Democratic Committee. And since time's a wasting, why don't we proceed? If you go to the very next slide, please, Anthony. Just so you have some context, here's a real quick profile of our county. Roughly speaking, we've got about 24,000 residents. The registered voters weigh in at about 16.5. It's overwhelmingly white. And speaking of overwhelmingly, 80% of the votes in our county in 2020 were for Mr. Trump. Among the top 5 employers are 2 I want to mention. One is the public schools. The other is the Valley Health Hospital, located in our particular county. And the poverty rate is well above the state average, weighing in at about 13, almost 13.5%. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here's what I want to touch on. First, a thinking and planning session we held back in January of this year, the action plan that grew out of that, 2 of the initiatives specifically that followed from the action plan, some additional initiatives we're pursuing if there's time. And then I want to wrap up with some thoughts about door-to-door canvassing that relate very much to this subject. Next slide, please, Anthony. Thank you. We began the summit inviting people of all colors, I mean, age, whether they were Democrat, Independent, Republican, racially, by jobs, you name it. And we had a turnout of roughly, as I recall, something on the order of 40 or 50 people, which is seismic for Page County. Anthony was good enough to come and really act as a ringmaster in many ways. And the main framework that came out of this was building trust and credibility through concrete local community activity. That was really from Ruby and from Anthony. Very nonpartisan and a really important philosophical shift. We broke our group into 4 different sessions. 1 was an organizational self-assessment. 2 was trying to identify key local issues. And I mean, just identify them. Getting to which of those we would pursue and how and why was a later step. First, just identify the issues. Thirdly, different aspects of our communication program. And finally, with an eye ultimately towards trying to develop candidates for local office. After we held the session, we spent about 6 weeks pouring through the ideas that had bubbled up and came up with an action plan. We recommended it to our committee and the committee adopted it. Next slide. It was important, I think, for our group, and I would highly recommend this to anybody else who attempts something like this, to identify the criteria for selecting which issues we realistically should pursue. And there were roughly 5 criteria, focusing first on local issues. Secondly, it has to be feasible in terms of dollars and people to actually do the work. Thirdly, we thought it would be very efficient if there was some pre-existing operation and we could collaborate with them or build on their momentum, ride their coattails. Fourth, we thought this should be visible, because if we're trying to influence the community and nobody knows what we're doing, that's not very helpful. And finally, we have the theory that this becomes a virtuous cycle. If you become of better reputation, more visibly a good citizen. It will encourage people who sit on the sidelines or who are afraid to get involved to step forward. Next, we identified through that process a handful of specific issues that we thought we should and could pursue. One was quality healthcare. Second, really a subset of that, you might say, mental health services. We focused on jobs and job training. Public education, we thought, was critically important. And then ultimately some thoughts on work we could do from an environmental perspective. The others we thought were critically important, but they really weren't feasible for us based on the criteria identified on the prior slide. Next is one of the specific initiatives I wanted to highlight, and it comes out of the public education category, and that is we're arranging for scholarships for students from both of our local high schools. The idea is to select winners either for four-year college, community college, or trade school. We didn't want to be accused of being elitist and limited this to four-year colleges. And very important, an organization exists in Page County, which, as I understand it, may well exist in other counties as well. It's a pre-existing tax-exempt foundation. It's a 501c4, if I recall correctly. And that enabled us to structure the program in a very careful way. So the citizens of our county, and that includes Republicans already who've stepped forward, by the way, are making the contributions directly to the foundation. So we organize this, but the funding is not coming out of our treasury, nor is it coming through contributions to us. That phrase should be contributions to it. The contributions are coming from citizens directly to the foundation. We are specifying the criteria for the winners, but the foundation will administer the program and select the winners based on those criteria. So this design, I think, really minimizes the risk of being accused of getting overly political in public schools, which was a concern to many people, and really maintains the focus on community building. A second initiative that came up was Roadside Banners. And this was not to hide our bushel, our light under a bushel, to try to make clear what we stand for and promote it. And if you turn to the next slide, 2 slides, Anthony, the design of this is very intentional. And this is on the side of the headquarters we're currently maintaining in Luray. At the very top is our slogan. At the center is the message that we're presenting. And only at the bottom, relatively inconspicuously, is who's promoting this. And we came up with 6 of these. They're sprinkled across different parts of the county. Here's another example, same format with the main message being only in the middle. Next slide, please. A couple of, I'm going to mention just 2 here because time's running short. We have an annual dinner like a lot of committees, and we included in our program a recognition award. So this was to identify somebody who's a leader with a local organization and recognize his work. This was pretty straightforward, just a plaque and a monetary contribution. We got a lot of really good coverage in the local media. And again, this is community building. The final one I'll mention here is Roadside Cleanup. We've been doing this for many years, twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. There are Adopt a Highway signs that mention the Page County Democrats. It sometimes gets into the local newspaper, and it's good for the community. Finally, the last slide, a lot of the foregoing, I think, provides more visibility for Democrats, hopefully helps neutralize some of the Democrats are demons sentiment out there. And it slides into a particular thing we're trying to do in our county. About half of all the registered voters are ND, meaning no data when you look in the van. And the door-to-door canvassing that we're doing is seeking to identify others among those ND who in fact lean Democrat or are strong Democrat. We think there's a lot of value to doing this. One is obviously enhancing the database, but more importantly, we're focusing on people 18 to 40 And we think they're more likely receptive to our message and to become potential future candidates, particularly independent voters who want practical solutions regardless of party. And on local issues is what we're really honing in on. And in our jurisdiction, at least, there are a number of positions, town council being one of them in Luray, which are nonpartisan. So I think focusing on local community, focusing on these relatively younger voters, and hopefully after we have given a better reputation and more visibility to Democrats in our community is what we're trying to achieve. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for your time and pass the torch to Sam.
Thank you, Skip. Excellent. Sam, you can share your screen and jump in.
All right, can you see me now? All right, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be with you. I'm Delegate Sam Rasoul. I get to be the only Democrat in the House of Delegates in the Virginia House in the western half of the state. So we bring up the western flank, and we spend just as much time trying to convince my party, being a Democrat, to pay attention to all these issues around the state, as we do, of course, trying to serve the people. We wanted to talk about one initiative that we've got out of our office called Democratic Promise. And really, it's around the deficiency of trust that we have in government and politics. There was a great book called American Amnesia, which said that in the mid-60s, trust in government was around 2/3 of the American public trusted government. Now it's less than 1/3. And so if we take some of my day job, which is in organizational development, and we say that the best in neuroscience, people are either driven by fear, as we know that all too often, or we can build trust, which is harder, but more long lasting. And so we see the distrust in government has had a precipitous decline over the years, as is not news to anyone, that's for sure. And in particular in the parties, whether it be Republican or Democrat, there have been issues for sure. And I found this meme amusing. We used to laugh at comedians and listen to politicians. Now we laugh at politicians and listen to comedians. I certainly appreciate John Oliver's segments, and which is a mix of both. So, you know, what we do is especially after the Trump election in 2016, was to create this initiative and just to try to show the Democratic Party that there are ways of spending these billions of dollars on campaigns, even if you spend a small fraction, to build goodwill and trust, and as very tactical ways of doing that. And so many of you might have made calls to voters, and through our computer system, the NGP system, where we say, well, why don't we do that year round, make calls, but not always asking them for things. Why don't we see if we can help them? And so we rebuild trust by reaching out, listening, connecting, and then offering very specific help. To me, it's particularly important being a Democrat because we're the party of institutions and institution building. We believe that government and institutions play an important role in people's lives. And so we have an obligation to make sure that we're connecting people, everyday people, with those very services and institutions that can help them. And so our promise is that our volunteers will call and make this connection and try to rebuild trust and rebuild that goodwill. And what we found is that in our system, that 99.8% of people do not need help, but they are very appreciative that people would call and simply do this. We use our volunteers just like you would in any other campaign. We utilize this at the local Democratic committee level, which is the basic building block of a party, and say, okay, volunteers can be calling you around and asking only 2 questions. It's a very simple script. Are you having any problem with government services? And then which ones? And so we think about it as like proactive constituent services. People contact my office as a state rep consistently with issues. In this case, we can actually go fishing for some ways that we can be helping folks. And then once someone is identified in the computer system, then a case manager can simply give that person a follow-up call and say, hey, how can I help you try to get this issue solved? Remembering that of the 1,000 people you call, maybe 5 of them actually have an issue, but those 1,000 people are so grateful that, hey, the only time I used to hear from a political party or candidate is when you need one of 2 things, votes or money. And now someone's actually trying to flip the script here. And when you think about it, this is exactly how unions grew to be so strong in their heyday. It wasn't because of the contracts they negotiated. It was because it was a sisterhood and brotherhood. It was a solidarity that your problem was our problem. And whether it be personal or otherwise, and people could lean on each other. And imagine if you were able to build that solidarity within a political party and people felt like they weren't just a commodity. I mean, how many of us are just so done with the chip in $3 now? It's urgent for you to renew your party membership, whatever that is, which there's no such thing. And in Virginia, at least, this kind of rhetoric, of course, makes people lose trust in government and lose trust in our political parties. And so that's the Democratic promise in a nutshell. I'll stop sharing and then turn it back over to Anthony.
Thank you, Sam. Hats off to Cynthia, Skip, and Sam. You were all concise, really, really interesting material. I'm going to start, or maybe Erica and Cody could help me as well, scrolling through the chat box to see if any questions have come up. Yeah, Paulo, I like your comment. The world is falling apart unless you give us $19. Isn't it interesting how it's always an odd figure like that? We need to raise $343.12 by midnight. So bizarre. So anyway, I don't see any questions in the chat, but encourage people to put them in and just go ahead and put your hand up. And Paulo's got his hand up. So go ahead, Paulo. It can be a question for all 3 of our presenters or for one of them.
I was actually can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hello? Okay, awesome.
Yes.
So I have to get going soon. It's great to see Cynthia and Mr. Rasoul. I know you keynoted our Outrun Virginia talk a few months ago. My question was to Mr. Halpern. It seems like you've identified a new group of voters in your county, and it seems like you're talking about local issues. Sometimes what I've noticed when folks talk about talking local issues, it doesn't seem like there's space there to allow candidates who may be your quote unquote non-traditional Democratic candidate to run for office in the context of someone's identity not being a local issue and being part of a culture war. And I was wondering if you've had success in recruiting diverse Democratic candidates to run for local office with this model. Because
it's too soon to tell. We just initiated this literally a few months ago. We're making efforts in the direction that you're talking about, and we've got I'd say fairly diverse membership within our committee. So that's a start, but time will tell, frankly, whether we can make inroads along the lines of what you're talking about. It's a good question. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Skip.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Paulo. I'm going to go to a question in the chat and then go up to Kathleen. Actually, it's Skip asking Sam if you'd explain how that intro goes when somebody picks up the phone from one of your volunteers. How do they start the conversation?
Right.
Hi, my name is Skip, and I'm a volunteer with the Page County Democratic Committee with our new initiative, Democratic Promise. We're calling around to see if our neighbors are experiencing any problems with government services, and just wanted to check in on you and see if you're having any issues that maybe we can help out with. And so that's the intro, nice and easy. You put in the word Democrat, you put in your local committee. You can of course customize that. And what we've done is partner with the local committees over time, whoever wanted to pilot it out, to inject, help you with your van, because you've got your own van system, your own database, and put that script in your van. And so that way you can be calling your neighbors.
I see. Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kathleen, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So the first, I've got two questions, quick ones. One's for Skip. You're a county-wide organization, so I'm curious, how many miles are between your towns?
I can tell you in terms of how long it takes to drive from
That
the
works.
north end to the south end of the county. It's about an hour.
Okay,
It's very, very rural. It's really quite sparse. And there are an awful lot of trees between as you go 59 minutes, there are a lot of trees, a lot of mountains, a lot of water. I'll put
Gotcha.
it that way.
yeah, I'm asking from the perspective of my county, which is about 70 miles long and has 3 major towns. And so, yeah, geographics are the issue. And then for Sam, I'm curious, how many helping hands did you have to start with? That your project sounds fabulous, and I just wonder how many folks you had in the very beginning to get this thing off the ground.
I think we had, over time, we had about 15 or 20 local Democratic committees. And then those committees, as they were utilizing that, all had their 15 to 40 folks who would help out with the project at any given point. We continue to push it along, and we hope to create enough of a buzz to get the Democratic Party of Virginia, which needs a lot of help, to say, well, this should be a core part of our outreach plan. And if you can imagine, the governor's race spent $70 million on just the Democratic nominee for governor. What if we spent, just 2 or 3% of that on, this kind of regular engagement with folks, the kind of goodwill that, $1 or $2 million can really show.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'm going to quick question from the chat and then go to Erica. She has a question. Skip, someone asked if the Republicans are also well organized in Page County.
From what I can tell, and it's hard to be sure because I haven't been a fly on any of their walls. I would say no. I think they are sitting on their hands because they've got such an overwhelming percentage of the votes. And it's sort of mindlessly, mechanistically, that very strong orientation of people in their favor. And I don't see them out there working hard. I'll put it that way.
Thank you, Skip. Erica.
Thank you. Yeah, so quick question for each of you, if that's okay. So for Sam, I'm wondering if you're finding that you're able to recruit volunteers to do that kind of outreach, who are like people who might not have been willing to phone bank and all the other sort of typical activities, if it's a way of bringing in those volunteers with a different kind of personality. For Cynthia, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what the curriculum was for, not for the FADE group, but for the second group that you mentioned, where you said there was like you showed us a picture of the graduating class. I'm wondering what the curriculum was there. And for Skip, I was wondering, with the scholarship initiative, if you're finding or have any way of knowing like whether people are aware of the Page County Democrats' role in it, and if it's sort of like translating into your hope of detoxifying and developing some warmth toward local Democrats.
On my end, the people absolutely hate calling folks for votes and money for the most part. And so it's you're able to really tap into a whole new volunteer base to say, oh, I get to actually try to help people. So it certainly has inspired folks.
Excellent. Cynthia?
So Erica, the Anson program was our inaugural one. So it was our pilot. So we definitely took learnings from that one and incorporated those into the Scotland program, which was our second one. What we did differently in Scotland was that in Anson, our second session was the one around basic civics and what's available in your community and what's available with your local government. And we actually made that the first session. So we think that being the first session, the other piece that was, we think, impactful was that we had that first session on a Sunday, and the next day was the county commission meeting. And so there was energy to take what they had just learned and put it into practice and to see it in action. So the curriculums were probably not very different. Some of it was the order was a little bit different. And so we also had the program assistant that was part of the program on the Scotland one was someone right in the community. And so he helped to lead them into the county commission meeting. He was a preacher he's a preacher in the community. And so had a lot of great connections. And so some of it's what we're talking about, but some of it is also having those folks all together. And the last thing I'll say is, Scotland, rural places like everywhere are aging. So you're seeing them get older, younger people leave. And a lot of those folks who are involved are the older folks. My connections in some of those counties were probably the folks well above 40. And they all said, when you said we want to reach these 18 to 40-year-olds, they said, well, where are they? We don't know them. Well, there's under a 30-something-year-old county commissioner in Scotland County. He knew the 18 to 40-year-olds, and he is the person that filled those seats. So I think for us, it also means, engaging and reaching those folks who maybe are in that population. I love that Skip is focused on that same area because that's the future, right? Like the party and some of these civil rights organizations are kind of on their a little bit, I won't say their last legs, but they're struggling because they're not getting that younger group of people involved. And so getting a key younger person as a part of your program that's active is also, I think, what we found that was critical to helping us build out even more young people to actually attend. And then ultimately, they've gone on to do more in their community. And we were shocked at how quickly some of these things have happened, how quickly those 3 young men from Anson started an organization, and how within a month, several folks were actually on boards.
It is amazing. Skip?
Yes. I think the question was basically what's the visibility in the community of what we're doing in terms of the scholarship program. The answer is we think it will be visible, but in kind of a soft as opposed to a real hard kind of sell, which is preferable. There is an award ceremony at the end of each school year. There is a printed program at the award ceremony. The name of the scholarship will be in the program. The fact that it's the Page County Democrats will be made known. And many of the presentations have about 30 seconds with somebody from the organization to actually get up in front of the microphone on the podium and say something brief about the scholarship and the winner. So in that fashion, I think the answer is yes, it will be known.
I'm going to follow up to that. I don't see any other hands raised just yet. Skip, to ask, and I have a follow-up for Cynthia as well. If you have struggled at all with this balance, because I know we talked about it when you were going through the Ruby training, between the visibility that you absolutely want, that's the point, and yet not like, pushing it down people's throats that we're Democrats and we're cool. How have you grappled with that?
We've grappled with it with difficulty. It's a genuine issue. And I know, and we could talk a long time and don't have a long time. I'd say the core of working through it in the case of the scholarship program was identifying the fact that supporting public education is a core democratic value. This isn't some cloak that we're putting on artificially to exploit the situation. This is simply making known who we are, what we truly believe, what we traditionally have supported, as opposed to thinking, oh, we're Democrats, we need to go hide in the shadows. Same thing with the roadside banners. These aren't creations which we just adopted. They're publicizing or making known, a better phrase, I think, values that we do support. They're genuine. And that's the key thought, I'd say. It's genuine.
And yet those banners at the same time, the Democrat sponsorship is subsumed beneath the core message.
Deliberately subsumed, evident, but subsumed.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna take the liberty as the facilitator to ask Cynthia a follow-up question. Cynthia, I know this is early, and like all innovative, successful people, everybody wants to know when you're gonna scale this up to tackle the universe. But I'm wondering about a next step in scaling. Have you and Helen and your team begun to think about how a similar model might work in the Native American communities that are also pretty substantial in your part of North Carolina, and the Latino communities? Is that something you're thinking you might want to tackle, or help another group tackle a very similar, might not be a barbershop setting, but what are you thinking about those, if anything?
So we're definitely thinking about it. I will say we're probably most thinking about 34 days from now, November 8th.
For sure.
Because in addition to these programs, we have a pretty robust Canvas, 6 days a week Canvas program, and we're doing quite a few other things. But actually the second largest group of color in our 7 initial counties is actually Native American. And so we were actually just having a conversation about that population just yesterday with my program director. And our focus is not just African Americans, it is Hispanic and Native American. The lower hanging fruit, probably the easier to get to, is that African American population. Not necessarily the easiest to move, but we'll see. But what we discussed with the Native American, that is definitely a 2023 initiative that we want to, identify how best we can do it. What it means though is that trust that I think Sam was talking about, which is all of this. I think what Skip was talking about, it is coming into the community. We're a 501c4, we are nonpartisan, but we're a progressive organization. So our values are very clear and evident. And as we probably get into some IE work, it'll be even more evident. But what we came in intentionally not like talking about voting. We did vaccine work. We're doing these, nonpartisan, like those men in the barbershop are never asked their party. That's not a part of the criteria. And so what we do believe though is that we've got to get the right person or persons from those communities on board with our organization. So I was already thinking about a grant I'm going to write to help us get and fund full-time Native American staff that is closest to the community that can really help us. And we don't want to ever go into a community in a harmful way, but in a thoughtful way. So we really want to get the right staff in place so that we can, get into those additional communities.
That's great. Thanks, Cynthia. I saw Erica had her hand up. Erica, do you still have another question?
Yeah. If there's no one else, I'll ask another question. For Skip, on that banner that you showed us the picture of that had the badge, the police badge, and that implied support for local police, I was wondering if there was any pushback or internal conflict or debate around that.
You're on mute, Skip.
Talk about unobtrusive. I was on mute. There was not pushback on that. And even from one member of the community, our committee, who's fairly rabid is not too strong a word, thought it was a very good idea. And interestingly, a good friend of mine who was a non-Trump Republican discussed this with me initially, thinking, why do more right-wing people own law enforcement, particularly after January 6th, which is a pretty notorious counterpoint to law enforcement. Democrats want law and order also, but they also want justice for all. And that was the triptych that we ended up with: law, order, and justice.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to do a wrap up here in a minute, and Pablo has an announcement. But I want to make sure that, because we still have a few minutes, if folks have additional questions or comments.
Sure, if I could, Anthony.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah.
Kathleen. So I just wanted to say thank you all very much for speaking, and also Anthony, for this group. This is my first time here, and I'm from a heavily leaning Democrat state, Oregon, but my county is very, very red. And so that's where I'm coming from. And this was very helpful and eye-opening. And thank you so much, all of you.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. I thought the presentations were spectacular. So I'm going to bring us to a close. Couple of quick reminders. I'll give Paolo a moment here. He's got something coming up shortly in North Carolina he wants to mention. So first off, again, this is a monthly briefing series. Erica has been the primary organizer of this, but we are open to any presentation ideas, presentation people, of anybody who's kind of working in the space of not just trying to create better fortunes for Democrats. That's certainly part of it, and progressives. But it's also, how do we understand and tackle this extraordinary divide that has gripped our country and is spiraling us into very bad directions in a lot of ways. So if you have ideas, please let us know. We've had just fabulous speakers up to this point. Second point I want to make is that this whole realm that Cynthia, Sam, and Skip discussed, they're examples of community engagement that goes beyond ideology and partisanship, that engages people civically and in the life of their community. This is the major project of Ruby that we're trying to get off the ground. We already have our trainings, we have the briefings, we have a lot of stuff we're doing. We have a report coming out next month that's going to be fantastic. But this community works thing we want to launch in many parts of the country, but start with a small pilot. So it's tough to fund something like that. So we are looking for donors. If you all have any notions of people who could give, let's say significantly, however you define that, $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, or a bit less, because we're finding that getting funding for initiatives that are primarily rural is really tough with well-to-do liberals and Democrats, most of whhom have just given up on, and Erica says $1 million would be good. That I wouldn't turn it down. They've given up on rural. So anyway, sorry to put in a little plea, but if some of what you heard is exciting to you and you have folks that you think might get on board if they knew about this, let us know. We'd love to expand the base. And then we don't have a definite presentation for November. We hope to confirm soon, so we'll let you know about that. Paolo, go ahead and make your announcement about the November gathering.
Hi, yeah. So my name is Paolo. If some of y'all have seen me speak the last time we had a gathering, we commented that we offer free trainings to help rural county Democratic parties do diversity and candidate recruitment to increase the number of local candidates for local office. It took us 2 years, and 10 states later, we're finally going to be active in North Carolina. Next week on Thursday the 13th, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be having a joint training with 5 Democratic elected officials who are all diverse, young, LGBTQ plus women, people of color, all that stuff. And the campaign of Representative Charles Graham, who's running for Congress right now, aiming to speak to that region, kind of like hopefully maybe kind of show that it can be done, and help to ensure that we can, maybe not for 2022, but help them prepare for 2023 and 2024. Yeah, I would love to invite you all. I can send the link to Anthony, and we're gonna have a good time. There's a high probability we'll have a really good keynote speaker. So yeah, please. Excellent. Thank you, and come. Have a good night. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we'll wrap up now. We'll let you know about the November gathering when we've secured it and have all those ducks in a row. And the recording of this gathering, if you want to share it with friends and colleagues, with people who you think would be encouraged by this, it will be up on our website, I would say sometime next week. All right, thanks again so much to Cynthia, Sam, and Skip. Wonderful presentations, and thanks to all of you for your participation and your questions.